You might think, well, you don't buy a car without taking it out for a test drive. Right, and everyone laughs because that seems obvious, but then, a woman's not a car. And neither is a man, and really, seriously, really not an object. Well, as far as I can tell, if you live with someone, here's what you're saying to each other. You're the best I can manage at the moment. And maybe the same applies to me for you. And we both really don't want to take on any more responsibility than necessary. Plus, we both want to have the option of trading up if an opportunity comes along. And so why don't we just make do with this provisional arrangement while we cast our eye out into the broader world and see if we can fish something better in. And you can say I'm cynical about that, but I don't think I'm cynical about that. Because living together means something like, well, we're not permanently committed, and not permanently committed means, well, we're impermanently committed, and impermanently committed means better commitment, or perhaps to be alone, but forget that, because that's usually not true. Well, what kind of basis is that to have a relationship with someone? How are you going to found a relationship on that? Especially an intimate relationship. It seems obviously true. Well, but if it's obviously true, then you might say, well, why are people who live together before they get married more likely to get divorced? And one possible answer to that is, well, people who are more likely to get divorced are the same people who are more likely to live together rather than to get married. First of all, for someone to say that means they think that what they just said convinces you that all marriage is a piece of paper. And that's a preposterously foolish argument. I mean, at minimum, in the typical marriage ceremony, you make a vow by whatever is holy to you, or at least in front of the state itself, and then in front of your community as you define it, that you're going to make a commitment to someone.
결혼 전 공부를 하는 사람의 심리를 읽었습니다. 이 사람이 정말 나와 맞는 사람인지가 되어있어. 달리 말하면 이런 뜻이다. 이 사람보다 나와 더 맞는 누군가가 있을지는. 이런 생각은 헌신과 약속으로 이루어져 이런 것을 권유받고 어쩌면 그들이 좋아하는 진정한 사랑받는 그런 생각. 하지만 말을 그대로 할 수는 없으니까 그냥 결혼제도를 생일풀이라고 비난하는 것입니다. 결혼 전 동거를 해야 한다는 생각은 날이 갈수록 일반적이게 되어가고 있습니다. 이런 사고의 증가는 최근 심화된 젠더 갈등으로 인해 서로 화합해야 할 상대성에게 불신이 커졌기 때문인 것입니다. 그렇기 때문에 아무리 평생을 함께하고 싶은 서로 그들더라도 이미 이성에 대한 두려움이 있기 때문에 결혼에 뛰어들 용기가 없는 것이죠. 여기에 필요한 것이 바로 믿음입니다.
It's a necessary act of faith. And in our culture, because we're not very wise, we think faith means the willingness to suspend disbelief while swallowing a proposition that any fool would reject. Faith means the suspension of your rationality and the acceptance of an absurd claim. That isn't what faith means. Not really. Faith is what makes movement into the unknown possible. And you need to move into the unknown because that's where you're moving. And because the unknown is unknown, because the future is unknown, you cannot step forward into the unknown without faith. You step forward into the unknown future as a consequence of your faith in some principles. And if you love someone, if you fall in love with someone and you decide to marry them, you don't have the evidence at hand that that's the right person for you. What you have instead is the joint decision that come hell or high water, you're going to struggle forward together. And then you don't even know if that's the right decision. Because you're not going to know till you've been married. Like your whole life. You're not going to have the data. And so you do have to throw yourself into the abyss to be married. Just like you have to throw yourself into the abyss to be alive. You have to move forward in faith. And you made a vow. It's like, I'm stuck with you. Just like I'm stuck with me. And the vow is exactly that, right? In some real sense. The vow is, I'm going to treat you like you're me. And you don't even like yourself very much. So that's a vicious vow. And so you might say, well, how desperate do you have to be when confronted by someone else to change your ways? And the answer might be, well, you have to be as desperate as being shackled to someone makes you. You know, one of the reasons that Tammy and I have got along and are still together is because we both know that we're stuck with each other. And so we decided quite a long time ago that we didn't want to have the same stupid fight every day for the next 40 years. And that's like the definition of a bad marriage. It's like we have the same fight every day for 40 years. That's hell. So the alternative is, now let's just have a bloody fight right here and now and see if we can sort out whatever the hell is so stupid about us that's keeping us in this dismal hell. And why? Well, because otherwise we're just stuck with this misery. And if you can walk away and if you can leave, which you can if you're not bound together, then you're not going to withstand the horrible process of heat and pressure that's required to make you transform. You'll just walk around that. You'll just look for an excuse. People look for an excuse not to do that anyways. And so part of the reason you get married is so you're desperate enough to change. Well, why should I be committed? Well, what's the alternative? It's to be uncommitted. Well, are you free then? Or are you just aimless and hopeless and confused? And you admire people who are committed to something. You sort of wish yourself, when you're feeling aimless and you feel that your life is meaningless, you might think, well, I really wish I was committed to something. Wouldn't it be nice to be committed to something? It's like, well, commit to something then. And you say, well, I don't have the evidence. It's like, you don't commit because of the evidence. You commit because of faith. And there's foolish faith, there's naive faith and there's blind faith. And I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about staking your life on something that might work if you just, if God was willing, if the faith smiled on you and you put your whole soul into it. And that's what you do when you vow to stay faithful to something. And you can't simulate that. It doesn't work. If you're just living together, do you have kids? Because that's a commitment, that's for sure, and that's a real commitment, or it better be, and it's going to be inevitably anyways. And so if there's ambiguity about your commitment to each other, there's going to be ambiguity about your plans for children, and that's a huge ambiguity in most relationships. So that's not helpful. That just means neither of you know what the hell you're doing, and that provokes anxiety and uncertainty, and it decreases hope, because hope is experienced in relationship to a goal. And if the goal is ambiguous, maybe we'll have kids and maybe we'll not, well then there's no real hope there. And so that seems to be a pretty decent pathway to misery.